The bridge of the Varith Ascendant fell silent as 300 warships dropped out of slipspace around a single, unarmed human vessel. Fleet Marshal Torek Sui of the Krenval Compact allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Below him, on the viewscreen, stood a lone man in dark ceremonial armor, hands clasped behind his back, framed by the wreck of a Starlane relay station his own people had built. No fleet screen, no shield wall. Just a man standing in an empty landing bay, staring up at a camera drone as if it were beneath his notice. "Human," Torek said, letting his mandibles click with contempt. "You have 30 seconds to explain why your assembly destroyed 3 of our colony transports before I turn this station into dust. And you along with it." The man tilted his head. "You mean the transports carrying kinetic bombardment platforms disguised as refugee ships?" Torek's antennae stiffened. That information was supposed to be classified 3 layers deep. "You want war with Earth?" Torek snarled, leaning into the pickup, savoring the word war like a threat should be savored. The man, King Arden Voss of the Sol's Assembly, smiled. It was not a smile of fear. It was not even a smile of defiance. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting a very long time for this exact sentence to be spoken aloud. "We've been waiting for this," Arden said quietly. Then every light on Torek's bridge went out. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had begun with fleets or fire. It had begun with a handshake. Earth was young to interstellar politics. Barely 40 years past its first faster-than-light jump. And the Krenval Compact had approached humanity not as conquerors, but as benefactors. They offered trade routes, medical technology, access to the Compact's vast shipping lanes that spanned 11 star systems. In exchange, they asked only for resource cooperation in a handful of outer colonies. Arden Voss, then a junior diplomat and not yet king, had been in the room when the first treaty was signed. He remembered the Krenval delegate's translator voice, smooth and reasonable, explaining that humanity's colonies at the edge of Compact space were administratively inconvenient and would need to be folded under Compact oversight for mutual efficiency. He remembered his superiors nodding along, dazzled by warp drives and cancer cures. He remembered being the only one who asked to see the fine print translated a second time by a different linguist because something about the phrasing didn't sit right. That second translation revealed the truth. The treaty didn't grant oversight, it granted ownership. Every human colony past the Kepler line would legally become Krenval territory the moment the ink dried, and the humans living there would become, in the Compact's own legal language, resident labor assets. Ardan had torn up his copy of the treaty in front of the entire delegation. That was the day the Compact decided humanity was a problem to be managed. That was also the day Arden Voss began quietly building something the Compact never saw coming. For 12 years, the Sol Assembly played the long game. Publicly, Earth remained cooperative, polite, even deferential, agreeing to administrative reviews and resource-sharing negotiations that always seemed to end in humanity giving up a little more. Privately, Arden, now Prime Speaker, soon to be crowned king under Earth's newly unified constitutional monarchy, was doing something no alien race in the Compact's 4,000 years of dominance had ever accounted for. He was making humans boring. Deliberately, methodically boring. Earth's official military spending dropped. Its warship production slowed to a crawl, the Compact's analysts logged with satisfaction. Human diplomats stopped pushing back in negotiations. Human colonies stopped filing grievances. To Compact intelligence, Earth looked exactly like every other species that had eventually accepted its place in the hierarchy. Tired, compliant, unremarkable. But no one expected what was happening in the systems. The Compact never bothered to inspect. Because the treaty the Compact had drafted, the one designed to strip Earth of its outer colonies, contained a clause the Krenval lawyers had written for their own convenience. Any system without a permanent Compact administrative presence remained under full sovereign human control, indefinitely, until formally annexed. The Compact had assumed humanity would never notice the loophole, or would never have the resources to exploit it before annexation caught up. Humanity noticed. Humanity had 12 years, in the shadow of 3 administratively inconvenient, dwarf systems that Compact surveyors had written off as worthless. The Sol Assembly built shipyards the size of small moons. They reverse-engineered captured Compact drive cores, refined them past anything the aliens had achieved in centuries, and built something the Compact's rigid caste-based military doctrine had never prepared for, a fleet designed entirely around deception, patience, and asymmetric strikes. They called the program the Long Silence. and the day the Compact's kinetic bombardment platforms, disguised as refugee transports, meant to soften 3 human border colonies before a routine annexation, were intercepted and destroyed before they ever reached Earth's space. The long silence ended. Fleet Marshal Torek Sui had not known any of this when he arrived at the ruined relay station with 300 warships, expecting to crush an unarmed diplomatic outpost and drag its human overseer back to compact space in chains as an example. He had assumed King Arden Voss stood alone, because Earth had nothing left to send. He was wrong in a way that would haunt compact military doctrine for a generation. The moment the lights died across the Vareth Ascendant, Torek's tactical officer screamed a single word into the sudden dark. Contacts. Not one ship. Not 10, 211 human vessels, previously running silent inside the debris field of a dead asteroid belt. The Compact's own surveys had logged as empty 40 years earlier, lit their engines simultaneously. They had been there for days. Some analysts would later calculate they had been there for weeks, running on minimal power, waiting. That wasn't even the biggest surprise. The human ships didn't fire indiscriminately. They didn't panic. Each vessel moved with surgical precision toward pre-selected targets. Engine clusters, shield generators, command decks, as if the entire battle had been choreographed years in advance, because it had been. Torek watched his forward screen. A wall of the Compact's finest warships, buckle in less than 4 minutes. Belay that order, he barked at an officer reaching for the self-destruct override, voice cracking with disbelief. We surrender. We surrender. The channel to the human flagship crackled open. King Arden Voss's voice was calm, almost gentle. I know you were told humanity was tired, he said. I know your intelligence reports called us unremarkable. I let them believe that. I needed every ambassador, every spy, every officer in your compact to walk into this system absolutely certain they had nothing to fear from us. Torek said nothing. There was nothing to say. You asked why we destroyed your transports, Arden continued. You already know why. What you don't know is that this was never about those 3 ships. The truth stunned the entire bridge into silence. What followed was not a slaughter. That, too, surprised the Compact. Arden ordered his fleet to disable, not destroy, the surrounded Krenval ships. Escape pods were permitted to launch unmolested. Wounded aliens aboard crippled vessels were offered medical extraction by human corpsmen, who treated Compact physiology with the same careful competence as their own. It was discipline the Compact's own doctrine considered a weakness. Mercy toward a defeated foe wastes resources and invites future rebellion, their manuals insisted. Torek had believed that his entire career, watching human medics carry a wounded Krenval engineer out of a burning engine room at genuine risk to their own lives. Torek began to understand, for the first time, that he had grievously misjudged what he was dealing with. Why? He asked Arden later, aboard the human flagship, his wrists restrained but his voice steady. Would you show us mercy? We came to conquer your species. Arden considered the question honestly, the way he considered every question that mattered. Because you're going to go home and tell the Compact Council exactly what happened here, he said. And I need them to understand that Earth doesn't fight like a species that wants extinction for its enemies. We fight like a species that wants this to be the last war it ever has to win. The Council had made a terrible mistake believing its own intelligence reports. And within a month, that mistake echoed across every core world in compact space. Earth did not press its advantage by invading. It did something far more devastating to a 4,000-year-old hierarchy, built on the assumption that only the Compact got to write treaties. It published the original, unedited version of the Annexation Treaty, the one with the ownership clause, across every diplomatic channel the Compact used to negotiate with its dozens of client species. Species who had signed nearly identical resource-sharing agreements began asking uncomfortable questions of their own Compact administrators. Colonies that had quietly resented Krenval oversight for generations suddenly had proof, translated 3 ways to eliminate doubt, that the promises made to them had always been legal fiction. The Compact Council spent the next year fighting brushfire rebellions across 6 systems, none of which Earth's fleet had to fire a single shot to ignite. Torek Sui, released after 4 months in human custody, was the one who stood before the full Compact Council and told them what he had learned firsthand, that the species they had dismissed as unremarkable had spent 12 years building patience into a weapon, sharper than any warship in the Compact arsenal. They are not soldiers who want war, he told the assembled delegates. And for the first time in his long career, His voice carried no contempt at all. "They are a people who understood, before any of us did, that the only way to end a war permanently is to make certain your enemy never wants to start another one." Earth never declared victory. King Arden Voss made a point of it, standing before the newly formed Assembly Council months later, addressing not just his own people but every alien delegation, now requesting formal, honest treaties with the Sol Assembly. "We were never trying to win a war," he told them, his voice carrying across star systems that had once considered humanity beneath notice. "We were trying to earn the right to never have to fight one again." Somewhere in compact space, Fleet Marshal Torek Sui, stripped of rank but somehow more respected than he had ever been in uniform, repeated those words to a new generation of officers being taught, for the first time, to ask what a species actually wants, before assuming they already know the answer. And on a quiet evening on Earth, King Arden Voss stood alone on a balcony overlooking a city that had spent 12 years pretending to be ordinary, and allowed himself, at last, to simply breathe. He had built a silence loud enough to be heard across the galaxy, and the galaxy would never underestimate that silence again.